start with the objectives. You should be on the objectives screen. I have two objectives. First one is that you guys will be able to state why educational effectiveness should not be measured by standardized achievement tests. That's kind of like the main idea here. And the second objective is that you guys will demonstrate this knowledge by specific reason, by labeling specific reasons outlined in the article. Okay, so the general thesis of this article was that educational effectiveness should not be measured by standardized tests. And I'll go into the reasons why. My main strategy for trying to get you guys to remember the reasons was a mnemonic device. And that mnemonic device, it's kind of like Roy G. Biv to remember the colors of the rainbow. My mnemonic device was what could go wrong. What could go wrong? I don't know if any of you guys do Reddit, but there's a whole subreddit called What Could Go Wrong. It's just basically people doing things that they probably should not be doing. It's not going to turn out well, right? So I thought that was also an applicable question to our topic. What could go wrong with standardized tests? I'm sure you guys have found out a lot, right? Okay, so the W in the first W for what could go wrong stands for what's taught does not necessarily equal what is tested on standardized tests. The C is corporate interest behind standardized tests. The G is that they're too general, and the last W is actually a question. What is score variance? Score variance is going to be super important here, at least for my presentation, on how, basically what's used to measure standardized tests. Okay, so the first W, what's taught, is not necessarily what's tested. Basically with that one, student performance on standardized tests are heavily influenced by three causative factors, only one of which has anything really to do with what's taught in the classroom. That's the first one I have there, what's taught in school, right? The other two aren't specifically related to what teachers teach in the classroom or what students learn. The second one is a student's native intellectual ability. This is kind of like IQ score, right? Not necessarily related to what they're covering in the classroom, what the teacher's teaching, what they're learning. And the third causative factor is a student's out of school learning. Again, that's something that they're learning, that's the things they're learning in their home environment, outside of school. And those are the types of questions that greatly benefit students from higher socioeconomic status groups, because those kids are learning more at home than students with lower, that come from lower socioeconomic status groups. So again, only one of those three causative factors is actually being tested in standardized tests. Okay, so this is, I don't know if you guys are on this thing, but this is like my first interactive slide. It's just kind of like, I'm trying to make these as easy as possible. Standardized tests are meant to measure only what students learn in the classroom, true, false. So you can literally click on one of those. And the cool thing about this is, like, pretend this is a smart board. I can go onto the smart board and go to show responses, and I can be like, well, it might take a while. Okay, one student answered true, I don't have anyone answered false yet. So I can give real-time feedback in terms of like, and it's all anonymous. So students like, they don't have to feel dumb. Maybe I can answer this. I don't know, but I'm gonna try, right? I used it a lot in my classes, and students really like it. Anyway, I'm gonna keep going. So the C, the what could go wrong, the C and the what could go wrong stands for corporate interest behind standardized tests. So I'm just gonna read this quote. It says, the companies that create and sell standardized achievement tests are all owned by large corporations. That is true, I looked into that. Like all for-profit businesses, these corporations attempt to produce revenue for their shareholders. In other words, corporate interests don't accurately or always represent the interests of students and teachers. They do not put students and teachers first. Like any business, it's profit, right? Okay, rolling along. So, agree, disagree, interactive slide. Basically, it just says the primary concern for the corporations that create and sell standardized tests is to produce revenue for their shareholders. This is one of those things where I asked the class, would you agree or you disagree with that statement, right? Okay, so I could pull it up and everyone's going to agree. Okay, so here we go. The G in what could go wrong is that they are too general. Standardized tests are too general. There's too much curricular diversity in the United States that forces test makers to produce a one-size-fits-all exam, hence the picture of those jeans, right? One-size-fits-all garments. If you've ever tried those on, sometimes you realize that one size does not necessarily fit everybody. And again, what this essentially means in terms of standardized testing is that there is always going to be a certain level of discrepancy between what is tested and what is actually being taught and what is actually being learned in classrooms across the country. So standardized tests should, according to this article, at best be used as a rough approximation of a student's status with regards to the content domain represented by the test. Not all classrooms are created equal, right? Students and teachers will inevitably, with like across the countries, within states, even district to district, they're going to be covering. They're not all going to be covering the same content and the same knowledge and the same skills, right? Okay, and the last one. Sorry, this is one more interactive slide. I'm just going to skip it because I'm kind of pressed for time. The last W in what could go wrong is actually a question. It is, what is score variance? Score variance is super important to understand in terms of, I guess, this article. What that is basically score variance is a spreading out of students' test scores to come up with data for comparative interpretations. Basically what that means is that test creators, those companies, want to create a nice bell curve with those results, right? What that means specifically is when they're going through these tests, like when they're going through the questions in their tests, the best questions for them are the ones that only 40 to 60% of students answer correctly. Those are the questions they're going for. If students answer a question, or 90% or above of students answer the correct question, most of those questions are taken out, right? Now, again, the reason, because they want that nice bell curve. I'm in the 25th percentile, I'm in the 19th, right? So the contradiction here is that the questions that a majority of students get right, 90% or above, tend to cover content that teachers and districts deem the most important, right? This is the stuff that is really important, but they take it out. But since test makers ultimately want to spread out that data to get that nice bell curve, many of those questions are left out. Again, it just goes back to that same point of what's taught in school or in specific classroom isn't necessarily what's covered in standardized tests, or if it is not even half of what's covered. Okay, so my last thing, this is like my little formative assessment to end this. I just said draw lines to match the mnemonic device, the reasons why standardized tests should not be used to measure educational effectiveness. Two of the reasons in the middle are not used. So basically what you